Konnichiwa, Sutato. It's the Pop Culture Stud. And today I'm here to talk about the 1986 Japanese horror anthology film Naito Naito Mayonaka no Akuma, or Nighty Night Midnight Nightmares, directed by Hirohisa Kokusho. Originally, Nighty Night was considered lost for, I believe it was over a decade, which is insane because, as you know, the 1980s had video nasties. This was the equivalent. Direct to video films in Japan was a big thing, just like it was here. So I want to delve into the review, but I also interviewed Hirohisa, which I'm really excited to do the Q&A on here. Now, we couldn't communicate by voice, but I asked him a bunch of questions and he replied, so I will be delving into that. So the anthology has 4 films in it, and one thing I love about this whole anthology is it's extremely bleak. Each story within the film seems to have a bleakness to it that is such a refreshing thing when it comes to horror anthologies, because usually you have one where the hero escapes or it's good, but what I love about Nighty Night is there's always like a twist or a really funny gut punch, you know, where you're like, wow, I can't believe Hirohisa went there, because that's crazy. So story 1 is called Birthday Cocktail, and there's high school kids and they're celebrating the 18th birthday of one of their schoolmates, and then all hell breaks loose. They just start killing each other, and, you know, with knives. One girl even gets scared to death, which is crazy. It's one of the most insane films, one of the most insane stories within a film that I've seen. So Nighty Night is quite an insane film, you know. So Birthday Cocktail was really gory, really suspenseful, and it could have been a film within itself because there was so much blood and gore within it. And Birthday Cocktail, basically the girl spikes the cocktail, the champagne, and then kills them all. Spoiler alert. Story 2, Out of the Window. It's a supernatural story. These girls have dreams. They go out of the window and they die because they start seeing like this guy and he's luring them. So, you know, this yokai is pretty insane. He means business. So it was very intriguing how Hirohisa blends multiple genres in one. I thought that was really intriguing. And story 3 is my favorite. It's called Survival Game. The girl has I believe she's about 16, 17. She has a present, a box. She opens it and it's a video game. She puts in the video game. She forgets about it because it won't turn on. She falls asleep. She wakes up and it's a survival game. She has to kill a goblin. And each level is more intense because each level has a more harder monster or yokai, you know, which is insane. And the twist at the end is she kills the goblin with her ingenuity. She thinks it's over, leaves the game in, and then realizes, oh my God, level 2's starting. So as you could imagine, it is really funny. I laughed extremely, and I mean extremely, at this twist ending that was full of dark humor. Also, story 4 is Cinderella. So basically there's this guy and they have a date this guy has a date with this girl. They're at his house, I believe, and they're like relaxing. they're chatting, and the girl has something unusual with her face because she starts turning grotesque. You know, like it's incredible what they did with the facial prosthetics, because her face starts to like sag, and she starts looking in the mirror and feels the change, and her face changes, and she thinks she becomes ugly, you know, in the mirror. And you can see her body morphs and tenses, and you just think to yourself, wow, poor girl. And then the shock twist at the end is the guy comments on it and saying, oh, why is beauty skin deep? Why can it not be inside, you know? And one thing I love about Nighty is the different blend of genres that Hirohisa blends together in this film. And it's really intriguing how the different stories blend together so perfectly and form a narrative which is bittersweet, you know, like it's ended, but you want it more. Especially story 3 with the survival game. You could have made a 2-hour film about that because of how unique and engaging it is. And one thing I love about Nighty is everything is practical effects, because it reminds me of Muscle Bodybuilder from Hell, which basically, like, I'm a big fan of practical effects over CGI. I mean, I believe that they CGI'd the Goblin and a few other bits were CGI, but for the majority of the film, it was all practical blood and gore effects, which really amped up the anxiety factor of seeing these different stories play out into the inevitable conclusions. And the acting was superb because Japanese cinema has a way of making the acting really fluid, you know, even though it's like low budget. I just felt like the acting was like really toned down and really realistic, you know, because you get most horror films of the era of the 80s and it can be quite hammy, quite horrible, but each story like made it seem like it was realistic, like it was happening. And I really enjoyed seeing that play out because I wanted to see more. Constantly, I wanted to see more. And Hirohisa has become one of my favorite directors. So what I did was I reached out and I sent him a message on Facebook, and I said to him, Hirohisa, you know, your film, I really loved it. I would love to interview you about the film. So I asked him a bunch of questions, which I'm about to read to you now. So I sent him a full list of questions. I translated it through ChatGPT from English to Japanese, and then he did the same to me from Japanese to English. So he says, my answers may stray a little from the questions at times, but I wanted to talk about things that were as different as possible from what is written in the Blu-ray booklet, and which is an exclusive because he's talking about other things other than what's in the Blu-ray booklet that's in here. The Blu-ray booklet is a massive thing, and as you can see, there's a lot of extras there. But this booklet is quite thick. You never see many booklets that are this thick. And it's a thing of beauty, you know. And it's from one of my favourite companies of all time for films, you know. And one thing I love is the fact that this release is done with a lot of care and a lot of love. And I asked him this question. What made you want to become a director or an actor? He said, what sparked it was Star Wars, which was released when I was 13. On the surface, it seemed like a simple, straightforward entertainment film. But when I realized that it actually incorporated many different elements, such as mythology, psychology, and politics, I saw how deep it really was. That made me want to create films of my own, films that were not only entertaining, but also layered and capable of moving people emotionally. And that's what I did. I felt emotional watching his film because it was truly intriguing, you know. Of course, there was a background to why I came to think that way. When I was 5, I saw my first film, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, 1970. And after that, I grew up watching movies such as the kaiju films that were popular at the time, including Godzilla and Gamera, as well as disaster films like The Poseidon Adventure, 1972. I love movies and I loved movie theatres. Then, when I was in college, I realised something that surprised me as a child. I had repeatedly read all kinds of fairy tales and picture books, Grimm, Aesop, Andersen, and so on. Those stories were packed with fear, surprise, emotion, dreams, and hope. Also, when I was around 10 years old, I admired magicians. I remember enjoying the idea of astonishing people so much that I bought magic props and books. I said to him, how long did it take to make Nighty Night? And was it difficult to come up with the concept? He said, from the moment I decided I wanted to make a scary film to the day it was released, it took about 1.5 years. I believe the actual shooting took about 1 year. The concept itself came to me quickly. I wanted to challenge myself with a genre I've never attempted before, and to make a horror film which is still quite rare in the world of 8mm independent filmmaking. I had heard it said that if a film director can make an effective horror movie, that they can make films in any genre. Since I wanted to become a film director, I wanted to take on that challenge. Also, around 1980, special makeup effects were advancing rapidly, and many horror videos were being made using those techniques. But I felt that many of those works existed mainly to show off the effects, and it were lacking in cinematic interest as films. So I aimed to do the opposite, to put the story first and then use the latest techniques only when they were necessary to tell the story. And because many of the films and videos at that time were splatter films or gore films, which I was not particularly fond of, I set out to make a heart-pounding movie instead. At the same time, in student-made 8mm independent films, every element, acting, technique, everything tends to be underdeveloped. So making that kind of film was extremely difficult. My biggest goal was simply to make the audience's hearts pound, which my heart did pound. However, building the story was painful, as it always is. Creating something out of nothing is the hardest part. I do not believe I possess that kind of talent. So instead, I set concrete images and goals for myself based on existing films, asking myself what kind of work I wanted to create. For Birthday Cocktail, story 1, which I mentioned already, the model was dressed to kill 1980 for Outside the Window. It was Somewhere in Time, 1980, and horror short stories by Ray Douglas Bradbury. For a survival game, it was Alien, 1979, and Gremlins, 1984. For Cinderella, it was The Ghost of Yotsuya. And for the image of the entire work as a single film, uniting all the episodes, it was Twilight Zone, the movie, 1983. So he was stitching all the films together. I also asked him, in your view, how does Japanese cinema differ from Western cinema? He said, this is changing now, but the time 1998 was made, Japanese films had an image of being dark and gloomy. I think this was also related to the scale of the stories, which I will mention below. But whether it was due to the film stock or something else, Japanese films lacked vividness and flamboyance and colour. I've even heard that Japan's humidity had something to do with it, although I do not know whether that is actually true. Also, at that time, Japanese films rarely entered the video market, and even when they did, it was uncommon for them to become overseas hits the same way Japanese films do today. As a result, budgets were small, and naturally, the scale of the stories tended. Tended to be small as well. Human relationships and personal drama were usually at the center. Occasionally there were attempts at grander stories such as science fiction, but the rough edges tended to stand out way too much, and they rarely made me want to watch them. That is why many young people, myself included, admired Western cinema, especially Hollywood films. At the same time though, Japanese cinema with its dark atmosphere and its focus on human beings and their emotions may have actually been well suited to horror from the very beginning. I like the ways Japanese horror differs so strongly from Western horror. This is my question. I like the ways Japanese horror differs so strongly from Western horror. In your opinion, what is the main difference? He said, there is a lot of overlap between this and my answer above. One major difference is the strength of human emotion, grudge, resentment, and lingering hatred. In Japan, works like The Ghost of Yotsuya are classic examples. Those who die holding resentment on vengeance become ghosts, yokai. As a result, the horror naturally becomes more eerie and oppressive. It has a dark, gloomy, and deeply upsetting quality, which I agree with Hirohisa. That's one of the reasons I love Japanese horror, because it is so gloomy, bleak, and sorrowful. So I asked him the question, has independent filmmaking in Japan changed? If so, how much has it changed, and has it become more difficult to make low-budget films? I think it has changed, he said. In recent years, there have been independent films that, despite being independent, became major commercial hits. For example, One Cut of the Dead 2018 was made of a budget of 3 million yen and was even remade in France. Also, The Samurai in Time 2024, made for 26 million yen, won many awards both in Japan and abroad, including the Japan Academy Prize for Best Picture, and enjoyed a theatrical run of more than a year. When introducing Nighty, I sometimes describe it as an independent film in order to distinguish it from the commercial cinema. But when I do that, people tend to imagine films like those two, which creates a problem. In fact, independent film in Japan includes both relatively large-scale productions like those and much smaller ones. The latter are often student films made by people who simply cannot raise money. For reference, 99 was made for about 1 million yen. As for the ultra-low budget student-type independent films, I've been away from that world for 40 years. So unfortunately, I do not really know what the current situation is. However, when I was making films, most of the production costs went toward film stock and developing. I imagine the problem has largely disappeared in the present age, now that video can be used instead. To be honest, I envy that. I said, what are your favorite Japanese films? He said The Hidden Fortress, 1958, Seven Samurai, 1954, Red Beard, 1965, the Digimon series, the Gamera series, the Godzilla series, Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, My Neighbor Totoro, Nausicaa, The Valley of the Winds, and Spirited Away. I asked him, what are your favorite directors? Akira Kurosawa, Hayao Miyazaki, George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg. I want to say arigato gozaimashita to Hirohisa, Kokusho. Thank you for your interview. It was very enlightening. And one thing I love about interviewing a Japanese director is getting a glimpse of Japanese cinema of the 80s. You know, creating a film That was independent, that was low budget, and seeing all of the effort, the energy by all of the production, and the actors, everything was done, in my opinion, to perfection. It's a 5 out of 5 star film. I'm going to be posting my video on Letterboxd. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Arigatou gozaimasu. Sayonara. Bye bye.